Like Fred and George, they never saw anyone named Peter Pettigrew sleeping with Ron all those years on the Marauder's map. Why did Voldemort never make an unbreakable vow with the Death Eaters, so he would never be betrayed? Why don't they use Veritaserum in trials? Why didn't Harry see Thestrals from the beginning, since he saw his mother die when he was a baby? And why weren't the Potters their own secret keepers? Today, I'm going to talk a bit about these supposed plot holes in the Harry Potter story, which were pointed out by a page on Instagram. This past weekend, a lot of people sent me this post, and even though I've already talked about one or another of them specifically, I'm sure I've covered all of them. I've mentioned them in various videos on the channel, but since many people sent them to me on Instagram, I decided it's worth making a video compiling and answering them all. The post from the page is as follows: plot holes in Harry Potter that don't make sense, and it starts with a completely made-up image that doesn't even exist in the movies, which is Harry sleeping covered with what should be the invisibility cloak, but it doesn't make much sense. The first statement is as follows: Fred and George Weasley had the Marauder's map for years before giving it to Harry. The map shows the location of everyone at Hogwarts, but they never realized that their brother Ron was sleeping in the same room as a man named Peter Pettigrew every night. That's a very valid question. I don't think it's a question that doesn't make sense. It really does make sense. But this question has already been answered by the author herself, J.K. Rowling. First of all, Fred and George didn't care at all. They weren't paying attention to Ron. On the Marauder's map, actually, the last thing they would look at was the Gryffindor dormitory on the Marauder's map. They were looking at the secret passages of Hogwarts. They would just check if Filch was nearby or not. And it's worth remembering that Fred and George got the Marauder's map from Filch's office in their first year, right? So, when Harry enters the school, in Harry's first year, the twins are in their third year. So, in 3 years, they must have looked over that map from top to bottom, so it's very likely that they used the map to see other things and not just to look at the Gryffindor common room, especially at that time when Harry and Ron enter Hogwarts, right? And then, does Ron enter Hogwarts with Scabbers? Because, man, they already knew it inside out. They'd had the map for 3 years. So maybe they could have looked at the map and seen the name Peter Pettigrew. Maybe that doesn't mean anything to them, because they had no idea, and sometimes they even saw it. But Ron wasn't with him, because Scabbers, he used to wander around Hogwarts. He wasn't with Ron 100% of the time either. Do you think Wormtail disguised as Scabbers? All this time he thought he was safe there, hiding as a rat, didn't go out at night to wander around Hogwarts like a little rat? Of course he did, man. And then, in the third year, Fred and George give the map to Harry. And that's the case where the name Peter Pettigrew is most present. That's when they don't even look at the map anymore, because it's already with Harry, you know? Harry had no idea. Harry also doesn't see the name Peter Pettigrew on the map, okay? That only happens in the movie. Harry doesn't see the name Peter Pettigrew on the map.
It's Lupin who sees it, and that's why he goes to the Shrieking Shack to help Harry.
The second plot hole pointed out is that Thestrals are invisible to anyone who hasn't witnessed death. Harry saw his mother die in front of him when he was a baby, but he couldn't see the Thestrals pulling the Hogwarts carriages. Not until his 5th year, after he saw Cedric Diggory die. That's also a valid question, but let's remember something here. What do you remember from your life? When you were 1 year and 3 months old, that was when Harry saw his mother attacked. He doesn't really remember it. He only had dreams. He had fragments, flashes. He remembered a very green flash. That's it. He doesn't remember seeing his mother die. And seeing Thestrals isn't just about seeing someone die. It's about seeing and understanding death. It's about absorbing it. Then people also say, oh, but he saw Quirrell die, right? In the first year, he was literally unconscious. He didn't see Quirrell die. So when he sees Cedric's death, and that's why he doesn't see the Thestrals when he's leaving at the end of the year, he doesn't see the Thestrals. He only sees them when he comes back the next year, after the holidays. Right, in this case, because it takes him some time to understand, to process everything. So that's when the Thestral appears. For people who had this experience, it's not just about seeing someone die. And that's it, you know? And the next image shows the following. I'm going to read it exactly as it is. Okay, guys? The golden snitch, the golden ball, is worth 150 points and ends the game when it's caught. This rule makes the efforts of the other players, who score only 10 points per goal, almost completely irrelevant to the outcome of the match. Man, I just don't think so, okay? I don't think the points the scorers make are irrelevant, especially because Quidditch is a very dynamic game. While we have 3 scorers trying to score goals, we have 2 beaters there hitting, preventing the goals from happening at the same time. Catching the golden snitch isn't an easy thing. It's not simple. First of all, finding the golden snitch isn't like that. Like, the game starts, oh, the snitch is there, I'll get it. It's not like that. The snitch is very fast, it's very agile, it's hard to see, hard to find. So, the points, they're really much lower, right? I mean, 150 points, which is the biggest reward for catching the snitch, compared to 10 for each goal. But what really matters in the game isn't just the guy catching the golden snitch. And that's it. Because if the opposing team is winning by 200 points to 30, for example, and the team that's losing catches the golden snitch, it doesn't mean they won the match. No, they'll have 180 points because they get 150, they had 30, and gained 150.
So, they'll have 180, and the team that had 200 will win the match. The snitch gives 150 points and ends the match, but it doesn't give victory to the team.
That's why there are the beaters who stay there, trying to stop the guys from scoring. That's why the beaters also throw the bludger at the seeker. So, the game is very dynamic in this aspect, and the players, they know it. Look, we have to score at least more than 150 points for the game to really count. The difference has to matter. You know? So, the game is already based on that. The players already know they have to do this. So, I don't see why this is a flaw. Obviously, it's not just a wizard sport. It's different from a regular sport that would exist. Obviously, right? Actually, the golden snitch was something added later in Quidditch games. It didn't exist at first. Before the golden snitch, there was the golden snidget. And the golden snidget also wasn't part of Quidditch in the early days of the sport. What happened was that Barbaros Braid, who was the head of the Wizards' Council at the time, released a golden snidget during a game.
And he offered 150 galleons to whoever caught the little creature.
And that's where the scoring for the golden snitch comes from. After that, right? The golden snidget started being used in Quidditch matches. The position of chaser was created, which came before the seeker, right? And the chaser was responsible for capturing the golden snidget. But the snidgets ended up being killed because it's a very tiny, fragile bird. So they would catch it, end up crushing the little creature, and then they almost went extinct. That's why they were banned by Elfrida Clegg. And then, a guy named Bowman Wright comes in, who was the one who created the golden snitch to replicate the movements of the golden snidget. And then, the position of hunter ceases to exist and becomes the seeker. And that's why it's worth 150 points, because back then, when Barbaros Braid put the golden snidget in, he offered 150 galleons to catch it, you know? And then, this new rule was created. In the game, the next image says the following.
O Veritaserum é uma poderosa poção da verdade, mas raramente é usado no sistema legal bruxo.
Its use could have easily solved many cases, including proving Sirius Black's innocence and identifying Death Eaters, making many plot points unnecessary. Look, Veritaserum is a really powerful potion, but it's not absolute. First of all, it can be bypassed. It's not used by legal means, precisely because it's a potion that can be bypassed.
And it's really important to remember that truth is relative. Oh no, Kako, truth is absolute. What's true is true, okay?
But in the case of an individual telling the truth, it's relative, because if the wizard was confused by a spell to believe that something is true, the potion will make him say what he believes is true. Just like when Barto Crouch Jr. is interrogated by Dumbledore. When he puts the Veritaserum on him, when he's unconscious and all, he drops the Veritaserum in his mouth, wakes him up to give his testimony and all. He talks about the influence of Veritaserum, and Fudge says, he believes this is true. He believes that Voldemort has returned, so that's why he's saying it's true. So, in other words, Veritaserum is a powerful potion, yes, but it can be bypassed by wizards capable of doing so, and also, it can make a person who has been confused say exactly what they believe to be true, and not necessarily what is actually true.
And this next one says the following. Voldemort constantly fears betrayal from his Death Eaters, but he does not fear death. The Unbreakable Vow.
It's a binding magical contract that kills anyone who breaks it. And it's a big plot hole that Voldemort never forced his followers to make one to guarantee their absolute loyalty. Man, honestly, whoever wrote this either didn't read the books or didn't understand the character development. Because Voldemort is a guy who doesn't even consider the possibility of being betrayed, he doesn't think about it at all. Because the Death Eaters, his followers, feared him, and he knew it. Terror was his way of dealing with things. People feared Voldemort. To him, no one would even be able to deceive him. He's so egocentric. He's so selfish. He's so arrogant that he thinks no one could ever deceive him, trick him, make a fool out of him, or lie to him. Especially because he's an expert legilimens, right? He can get into people's minds and see who's lying to him or not.
In Snape's case, Snape deceived Voldemort, right? He was an expert occlumens. And Voldemort trusted Snape. He trusted him so much that he only kills Snape there. In the end.
Because he believed that Snape was the true owner of the wand, of the wands, not because he suspected Snape or anything like that.
And Voldemort definitely wasn't constantly afraid of betrayal from his Death Eaters, because his methods were to torture and kill anyone who betrayed him. So, he knew that betraying Voldemort was basically being sentenced to what an unbreakable vow would do. So why would he make an unbreakable vow if he already had that? With those followers, those Death Eaters, it was proof that he didn't trust them. He only trusted in his own greatness, that he blindly trusted Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Professor Quirrell announces that there is a troll in the dungeons. Dumbledore then sends the students back to their dormitories. However, the Slytherin dormitory is located in the dungeons, which means he sent them straight into danger. This point here is simply, I can't stand that while I'm reading the post. I'm also reading the comments. Then, there's someone who commented like, how lame is the person who made this post? Come on, people are really harsh too, right?
No need for that, man. Here, simply, Dumbledore speaks.
Prefects, take the students to their common rooms. Teachers, come with me to the dungeons. He wasn't just sending the Slytherin students to the dungeons because there was a troll there, and whatever. He and the other teachers were going to the dungeons. They were going to where the troll was. So, I don't get why this is brought up as a plot hole, really. I don't understand. All right. The Slytherin students, their common room is in the dungeons, and the troll had also come out of the dungeons.
And Dumbledore, along with the other teachers, go exactly where the troll was, where they were told the troll was, because the Slytherin students were in danger?
In this case, this one, I've already seen more than one person mention it too. The Potters used the Fidelius charm to hide from Voldemort, with Peter Pettigrew as their secret keeper. It's a big plot hole that they didn't just choose one of themselves as the secret keeper, like Gil Easley did with Shell Cottage, which would have guaranteed their safety. In fact, the Potters could have, or James could have made the secret with Lily, or, well, one with the other. They really could have. The problem is that you are forgetting something. Whoever did that maybe didn't understand, and whoever raises this question maybe doesn't understand that the trust James had in his friends was something. It was the most valuable thing there, you know?
Trust was the most valuable thing.
So, for him to consider being the keeper of the secret because he didn't trust one of his friends was something completely out of the question. For Tiago, he trusted his friends blindly, which, yes, in fact, ended up costing him and Lillian their lives. But that was Tiago. That's the kind of person he was. That's the way he was built. He was built that way. So, that's not a plot hole. If it were someone else, another character, fine. But we have to understand that character's personality, that character's traits, before just saying, oh no, this is a plot hole. Man, Dumbledore himself says, when Harry at the end of Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry is kind of down, right? And he says, oh, nothing I did mattered, right? Peter Pettigrew escaped. I shouldn't have let him live, right? I shouldn't have spared his life. And Dumbledore says, Harry, your father would have forgiven Pettigrew. He would have spared Pettigrew's life. In other words, He would have spared the life of the guy who betrayed him. So, this person who was James, you see, this person, he trusted his friends a lot. This isn't a plot hole. It's how the character was built. Now, this one is really good. I'm going to read it as it's written because I even commented on this post with this name because it was really good. Hermione receives a time sunflower. What is a time sunflower? It would be a time turner, right? But I don't know what the person did. She translated this with artificial intelligence. What happened? Anyway, all the images in this post are created with artificial intelligence, right? But I don't know if the person translated it using artificial intelligence or asked ChatGPT or some other artificial intelligence to say it like that. Like, hey, tell me the plot holes in Harry Potter, and just put it on the page. I think that's probably the case. Hermione gets a time turner in her 3rd year just to attend more classes. It's a significant plot hole that such a powerful magical object, capable of changing history, was used for something so trivial, instead of fighting Voldemort or saving lives. At this point, I have to agree that using the time turner just so Hermione could attend more classes is really kind of pointless.
In fact, I mentioned this in my episode about things that don't make sense. Harry Potter, the fact that it's such a powerful object. And, well, there at Hogwarts,
they say, oh, let Hermione use it since she's hardworking and really wants it but doesn't have it. For me, honestly, I get it. But for me, it doesn't make sense to give such a powerful object just to Hermione. Watch more classes now. Use the time turner now. The mistake in this part of the post, using the time turner to fight against Voldemort or save more lives, is completely useless. Because the time turner is only useful there, really useful, for those who know how to use it, for those who already know what's going to happen.
And you go back in time to be able to make use of what has already happened. A very clear example of this is how they use the time turner in the story, right?
They use it to save Buckbeak, but a lot of people confuse the thing about saving Buckbeak with like, Buckbeak died, and they go back in time to undo that. But that's not what happens. Buckbeak was never killed.
Exactly. They go back in time, save Buckbeak, but Buckbeak had already been saved by them because they went back in time. It seems confusing, actually. It is confusing, because our brain looks for logic in this, and there isn't any.
It's a paradox. It's a paradox. It really is a cycle. Time travel. The paradox of time travel in Harry Potter. It works this way. So the time traveler just goes through it. He doesn't really change things. A very clear example of this is also Harry casting the Patronus to save himself and Hermione. This had already happened. We see it happening. In fact, Harry thinks he saw his own father, but no, he saw himself. It's the same thing with Buckbeak. Buckbeak had already been saved. And how had he already been saved? Why had he already been saved? Dumbledore doesn't come to them and say,
if everything goes well, more than one innocent life can be saved. Where was Dumbledore coming from?
After everything happens with Harry going to the Shrieking Shack, with Sirius, where was Dumbledore coming from? From Hagrid's hut, right?
He didn't go there to see Buckbeak's execution. When the executioner went to execute Buckbeak, he had already escaped. He wasn't there anymore.
Dumbledore saw this, so Dumbledore saw Buckbeak tied up. He was captured. And then, when it was time for the execution, Buckbeak just disappeared.
And then, Dumbledore comes with this information for Hermione, for Harry to talk about.
Look, if everything goes right, more than one life can be saved. More than one innocent life can be saved. Because it already happened.
He saw that Buckbeak was saved, so he goes there and says it. And then, when they go back in time, they go and save Buckbeak.
In fact, in the book, it describes that they heard the sound of the axe cutting through the air and then coming down on the target. They thought they had heard. They only hear it. They don't see it. They thought they had heard the axe cutting off Buckbeak's head, but it doesn't.
What happens is that the executioner, enraged because Buckbeak had escaped, goes there and strikes the axe on the fence.
In the book, it's on the fence, right? In the movie, it's on the pumpkin, but he never kills Buckbeak. So, how is the time turner going to be useful in this case to save lives? You would need to know exactly when these people would be killed, but they couldn't be killed.
It's a very difficult thing, you know? It's a very difficult thing.
There's an Instagram post about this that I commented on, and people still come today. I already explained it in the comments, right? And even today, people come to say, no, oh, they could have used it to save Harry's parents, but they couldn't. Because Harry's parents were simply killed. So, nothing, no magic brings people back. No magic, not even the Resurrection Stone, which was supposed to try to do that, can't do anything, can't bring them back. What happens there with the Time Turner is just that. They simply go back and manage to save Buckbeak. Why? They knew the place. They knew the date. They knew the time of how it would happen. The Hippogriff will be executed at sunset on June 6th. That's exactly it. So they knew the place, date, and time. That's why they managed to stop it. And then, Buckbeak is never killed, you see? Never. Because if he had been killed, they wouldn't be able to save him. So, the Time Turner, in this case here, is introduced in this matter of saving lives. Fighting against Voldemort, it would be much more useless than useful, because messing with time is very complicated and causes great danger. You understand? So, I agree with Hermione. Receiving a Time Turner, which is very powerful, just to attend more classes, doesn't make much sense. But using it to fight against Voldemort, to save lives, doesn't make much sense either. The other image is about the Invisibility Cloak, and it says the following: Harry's Invisibility Cloak. It's a deathly hallow, described as infallible, and able to hide whoever wears it even from death itself. However, Alastor Moody's magic eye can easily see through it, a clear contradiction with the legendary power of the cloak. The cloak was not made by death, and the cloak does not hide anyone from death. That's a legend. The tale of the three brothers is a legend and doesn't match the reality of the objects, so much so that the Resurrection Stone doesn't bring anyone back to life, the Elder Wand doesn't make anyone invincible, and the Invisibility Cloak isn't this extremely powerful object people make it out to be. That's it.
Nothing happens to it. It doesn't die. Nothing happens to it. That's not it. That's not it. The Invisibility Cloak is simply more powerful than the others.
Because most cloaks made with Demagee's hair, or that carry a disillusionment charm, end up, over time, wearing out.
They start to wear out, they tear, and Harry's was indestructible in that sense. The invisibility remained perfect. It didn't become opaque. It simply wouldn't tear, you know? That's what it was about. It doesn't mean like, wow, he would put on the cloak and he was simply protected from all the evils of the world. And yes, Alastor Moody's eye was also an extremely powerful object, which gave him the power to see through things, including the invisibility cloak. That's not a contradiction. The Order of the Phoenix uses Polyjuice Potion to create 7 Harrys and confuse Voldemort during his transport. A much simpler and safer plan would have been to disguise Harry as a Muggle and have him travel by non-magical means, which wouldn't have triggered the Ministry's trace. The Ministry's trace isn't triggered in this case. Here, they are simply ambushed because they were already being watched. So, no matter how they tried to leave, whether Harry was disguised as a Muggle or as anything else, they would have been ambushed because they simply knew. The Death Eaters knew the information that Harry would be transported that day. How he would be transported didn't matter. The point is, the 7 Potters were meant to confuse, and, in fact, they did confuse. There were 7 of them, different ones. They were decoys, you know? Drawing attention and separating the Death Eaters is a genius plan, to be honest. Separating the Death Eaters and weakening the whole group. If you disguise Harry as a Muggle, they would just look and say, oh wait, there are these wizards here. There's that one I know. There's Moody, there's Mundungus, there's Bill, but this one, who is this? I've never seen this person in my life. It's Harry Potter, disguised as a Muggle. You get it? The plan? It sounds brilliant on paper, but it's not. It's not. It's that old story. It's really easy to be a backseat driver, right? A backseat driver, basically. The story's already written, and people say, no, it would be much better if they did it this way. But here, it just wouldn't change anything.
Because what happens is that they were ambushed. They were going to be ambushed anyway, no matter what.
The fact that they were disguised like that, disguised as 7 Harrys, was exactly the plan, so that if they were ambushed, they would have more time to get Harry to safety. That was the last one. That was the last one. Then, they signal the post here.
We explain something new every day. It doesn't mean it's right, it's new, but it doesn't mean it's right.
Anyway, guys, those were the plot holes. I really like to talk about these perceptions here, because this starts to become a Mandela effect. People keep repeating it until it becomes the truth, when in reality, it's not. You know, really, I'm not going to say they're not valid questions. They are valid questions, yes, but they're not plot holes. They have an explanation, they have a reason, they make sense.
If you don't get this right away, It doesn't mean it's a plot hole. It just means you didn't understand. Alright?
And the comments? Man, there was a comment from a lady here. She wrote this huge text refuting each one of the points. You know, that the images talk about? The comment has almost 5,000 likes. Look at this patient diva, who went there and wrote everything nicely. But the people too. Look, people go hard, right? Whoever posted this doesn't understand anything. Everything is explained in the books. The person who made the post just got stuck on the movies. I saw that in this post there are several plot holes. And about the plot holes, this was the best comment for me.
So, was there any of these things that you also thought was a plot hole? Have you ever thought, wow, this doesn't make sense, huh?
If you want to see a segment I made, here. I don't know if you're just arriving now. I made a segment about things that I think don't make sense in the Harry Potter books.
There's a playlist there. Feel free to watch it to disagree there too. You can, obviously, because what I'm saying here, I'm not the owner of the truth, okay? Much less the owner of Harry Potter. I didn't even write the story. I have my interpretations. There are interpretations that are open, you know, that don't depend much on the facts. But there are things that are facts, you know, and what I explained here are facts, even answered by the author herself, including this one about the Thestral. She herself answered. The one about the golden snitch, she answered. The one about Ron, she answered. You know, the one about James, she also answered. So these are things she herself answered, the path she followed there to create the story, you know? So, that's it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, leave a like and subscribe here. At the Leaky Cauldron, we'll see you in the next episode, and until then, mischief managed.